Hi, I'm your host, Jesse Gillis. This is Now is the Time to Talk. I'd like to start today's program with a quote. Well, not a quote, the first stanza of a poem. See if anybody knows this. Into our town the hangman came, smelling of gold and blood and flame. And he paced our bricks with a diffident air, and he built his frame on the courthouse square. The scaffold stood by the courthouse side, only as wide as the door was wide. A frame as tall, or a little more, than the capping sill of the courthouse door. And we wondered whether he had the time, who the criminal, what the crime. The hangman judged with the yellow twist of knotted hemp in his busy fist. And innocent though we were, which read, we passed those eyes of buckshot lead. Till one cried, "Hangman, who is he for whom you raised the gallows tree?" Then a twinkle grew in the buckshot eye, and it gave us a riddle instead of reply. "He who serves me best," said he, "shall earn the rope on the gallows tree." And he stepped down and laid his hand on a man who came from another's land. And we breathed again, for another's grief at the hangman's hand was our relief. And the gallows frame of the courthouse lawn by tomorrow's sun would be struck and gone. So we gave him way, and no one spoke, out of respect for his hangman's cloak. That was The Hangman by Maurice Ogden, written in the 1950s. I believe it was in response to the Holocaust, end of World War II, what had happened, and who let this happen to Jews, minorities, gypsies, Slavs. I'm not going to read the whole poem, but you can find this online. That's Maurice Ogden. And today I have a special guest with me, Lefty Morrill, Organizing Director, New Hampshire Peace Action. Lefty.
Good to be here, Jesse. I was touched by the poem for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that the death penalty has been something that I've worked on for many, many years. We'll talk about some of my history. It looks like you've done some research. But when I was in Pennsylvania, I ran a number of nonprofit organizations, and because of that I couldn't serve on other boards of directors because I was needing to raise money and supervise my own organizations. But the one thing that I consistently stayed on was the board of directors of Pennsylvania Abolitionists, which was the organization fighting the death penalty. Because no matter what you think of criminal justice and the way that it's implemented, the reality is that it's the only penalty that the courts can impose that you can't take back.
I did not know this.
So because once you've implemented it, it's done. So if somebody goes to prison and you're there for 5 years, you can be released. But if you're in prison and they then execute you and they say, "Oops, we made a mistake," it's too late.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, and that's just one of the reasons why. I just don't think that the state should have any authority to murder, kill citizens. It's something that we say is wrong. It's something that all of our major religions say is wrong. And so it's something that I've really, really struggled to work on and still do.
Okay. Yeah. And this, I had never really spent much time contemplating the death penalty. I briefly, bioethics at school, taken a course, touched upon it, wrongful convictions, but the act itself of the state taking somebody's life as a legal means for the crime they committed, where the state decides. And this, when did you start focusing on that?
I've done a lot of civil disobedience, so I've spent significant time in jails and prisons during the course of my life. I've worked for unions. I've represented some of the staff in prisons. So I've spent probably more time than anybody, except for actual long-term prisoners, in prisons and jails. So I've had the opportunity to talk to people through much of my life. And one thing that I'm really proud of was working with exonerated death row inmates, people who were convicted and except for some extraordinary work by citizens and lawyers who found out that they were actually innocent. So people who were convicted, and then later, when DNA evidence was available, they were found to be innocent. And except for that evidence, those people would have been wrongly killed.
Right.
So there are so many different reasons for not doing this, not the least of which is that, again, I used to be an ordained minister and come out of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And one of the 10 Commandments is, thou shalt not kill.
Yeah.
Technically in Hebrew it says, thou shalt not murder, but we have taken that in the churches and in Judaism to mean thou shalt not kill. And it's that profound that in these major religions, it's one of the 10 things that you're just not supposed to do. So if we're not supposed to do it as individuals, what gives the state the right to impose that kind of penalty on somebody and take somebody's life, no matter how heinous their crimes are? I'm not saying that people who have committed murder and some terrible, atrocious crimes shouldn't be punished, but there's a difference between punishment and vengeance. And I think that's what the death penalty is. It's not really punishment, it's vengeance.
Yeah. Okay. And then following up on the stanza of the poem, because we're talking about peace, activism, fighting for justice, what's going on right now, overseas, domestically. I say that with the hangman's, out of respect for the hangman's cloak, embracing evil, for all that was required of most of them, that they did nothing. This is, I keep going back to Milton Mayer's book, They Thought They Were Free. That's a 1955 write-up of Nazis, the little men in Germany. They were Nazi Party, they were Nazi Party members, but they were ordinary citizens.
Right.
And when we think that we don't have to do anything, that we could stand by, we are okay. We are not embracing evil. It's, my hands were clean.
Yeah, and unfortunately, too many of our political leaders feel the same way. With what's going on in Gaza right now, they feel as long as they're not doing anything, they say some nice little words, that it's a bad thing that's happening there, they can still vote to send weapons. They can still support the blockade of any kind of food or medicine or other aid going into Gaza. And just a couple of hours ago, I won't say who it was, but I was on a call with a number of other New Hampshire activists talking to the representative of one of our elected officials, and this elected official just thinks that by saying it's a bad thing, that's enough. But she still votes to send weapons. She still votes to allow the blockade of food and medicine and other aid. And that's exactly what's being said in that poem.
Legally, she's not held accountable.
I didn't do it. I said it was wrong, is the way that she looks at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of the disturbing things that in researching how these laws can be violated, like the Leahy law can be violated by the legislature by sending arms to areas where humanitarian disasters are unfolding, because they're legally not held accountable. They push it off on the executive branch. And how many times has Congress pushed off? War is pushed off on the executive branch. It's their constitutional duty to declare war. A who and a why and how long and what's the objectives is gone. So the AUMFs since 2001, the authorized use of military force are free game today. The same ones authorized for in response to 9/11 is still used today in I think over 23 countries, maybe 22 now.
And in lots of instances, they don't even bother with an AUMF. They just do it.
Just do it.
And since 1941, that's the last time we actually declared war.
Yeah.
So Congress hasn't declared war. They haven't authorized the executive to get involved in military actions in most cases, but nevertheless, we do that.
Right. Right. And so I leave this opening in response to the poem in your words. It isn't enough to talk about peace. One must believe in it. And it isn't enough to believe in it. One must work at it. Eleanor Roosevelt. So moving on, a little bit about you. I met you maybe 3, 4, 5 months ago?
Yeah, about that.
But you became the organizing director for New Hampshire Peace Action.
In March, yeah.
In March, yes. Yeah. It was about the same time I started this show. I had working for Veterans for Peace. I say working, volunteering with Veterans for Peace, being the representative on the New Hampshire Coalition for Just Peace in the Middle East, because I had been focused on what's been going on in Gaza and seeing what I can do. But your fighting for justice goes way back. Where did you grow up?
Grew up in Boston.
Boston.
Yep, I'm a Boston boy.
Yeah, okay.
So moved to Malden, an urban suburb of Boston.
Okay.
And that's where I went to high school. And have lived mostly in New England, but I've lived a number of other places too. I've done graduate study in college and moved around for that. Lived in Texas, lived in Kentucky, and when I was in seminary. And recently, three years ago, was living in Israel, doing graduate study for a degree I didn't need. Just was in a life transition and wanted to take some time to refocus myself. So studied international relations at the University of Haifa in Israel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. When did peace broadly, or fighting for justice, when did that start? When was is there a time or a...
I've thought about that, and I think my family life was not very positive, and my mother was abused at home, in the workplace, and watching what happened to her and the way she was treated, I realized later, I didn't make a conscious decision when that was happening, but when I look back at that and to think about why I've been so involved in these issues, I think that was the impetus for it. Was at some point when I was a child, watching everything that was happening to her. She worked as a server in a bar, and she would come back some nights where she would get robbed, she would get harassed, she would get grabbed and groped, and she'd come home in tears. And I would wake up in the middle of the night because she'd be coming home at 2 or 3 in the morning and hear her crying and talking to my father, and my father was not at all sympathetic. When back then, and I hope it can't happen anymore, but if somebody walked out without paying their bill, the server was responsible for that. So if I ordered $20 worth of food and booze and then walked out without paying, the server is responsible for paying that at the end of the night. So when that happened, my father would, let's just say, not treat her very well when that happened. So watching that kind of thing happening and seeing other families in the same situation, I just realized that this isn't right, and I need to work on things like that. So I've done a number of jobs where I was the only man in a similar position in the country. I was executive director of Pennsylvania's Campaign for Choice, a pro-choice political action committee, and of all 50 states, I was the only man in a similar position.
Okay.
So I think that's where it came from, is understanding that injustice that was happening at home, but seeing that it wasn't just happening to my mother, it wasn't just happening in my household. It was the system that was set up and the way that people were being treated. It was also the time when I turned to become a teenager. The Vietnam War was in full swing, and older friends were being sent over there. So I was very much aware of what was happening.
Yeah.
And so got involved. Yeah, when I was 13, I started getting involved in political campaigns. I had my first paid political job when I was 13.
Okay.
Working for Eugene McCarthy for president.
Where was?
This was in Boston.
It was in Boston?
Yeah.
What position was Eugene McCarthy going for?
He was run for president of the United States.
Okay, Eugene, okay.
Yeah, he was a senator from Minnesota, U.S. Senator from Minnesota. And he decided that he was going to be the peace candidate before Bobby Kennedy decided to run. So right here in New Hampshire, he ran in the primary against Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Okay.
When when Johnson was running for re-election, and they had this thing called Clean for Gene, where all these young people, all these young men would shave their beards and cut their hair, and put on suits and ties, and then so they could go knock on doors for Gene McCarthy.
Oh, that stands out.
And McCarthy lost. I think he got like 35 or 40% of the vote, but he was running against the incumbent president in a Democratic primary. And so what happened was Bobby Kennedy looked at those results and said, heck, I have a chance. If this guy who nobody has ever heard of can get this kind of votes, what do you think another Kennedy can do? So that's when Bobby Kennedy got back in the race. And of course, we all know what happened that year when he was assassinated. But yeah, that was a fun job. I was paid, I think I got 50 cents a week or some ridiculous amount like that, part-time, working as the coordinator for high school students, getting high school volunteers to work, even though I wasn't even in high school yet. But
what was some of the main policies? Do you remember?
I don't, because for me and for most of the people, the issue was the Vietnam War.
Ending the war.
Yep.
Yeah. What year was, and this was?
1968.
68. Oh, and Nixon and, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's.
And then Humphrey, the vice president, got the nomination. And because of all the stuff that was happening, McCarthy didn't get enough votes. Then Bobby was assassinated. So Humphrey got the nomination and wouldn't take a stance, kind of like what happened last year. Humphrey was so tied to Johnson's policies that Nixon could claim to be the peace candidate.
Right.
And he had a secret plan to end the war on day one. Does that sound familiar?
That sounds very familiar.
And in 1969, the peace candidate, he actually did end the war, but not in the way that we wanted it to. But all of this happened Nixon's election because Humphrey would not separate himself from Johnson and the policies that Johnson had.
Yeah, that's eerily similar.
I know. I didn't think of that until I just said it.
I'll have to revisit that.
Yeah.
Now, going back, doing a little digging, like I said before.
Okay.
Your governor run, Pennsylvania, 2002, Green Party candidate.
Right.
A unanimous nomination. That was said it was unique. It was one of the first of its time for the Green Party. That's what I was reading.
I didn't realize that, but yeah, that was something.
You were nominated. You are our candidate, and you run, and you actually pulled 38,000 votes.
Yeah.
I didn't write down who the other two you were running against, but some of the things that stood out for policies: universal health care coverage, 2002, a living wage, wealth tax, and a progressive income tax. And I think 2002, I might have been 14 years old and not paying attention to any of this, but the fact that that's still a desired policy to be passed.
Mm-hmm.
And today, Medicare for all, again.
Yeah.
Would you say it was progressive then, and it's still the same progressive thing, that's just the next step we need?
Yeah, it was really interesting because clearly I was not going to win as the Green Party candidate. Ed Rendell, the sitting mayor of Philadelphia, and the Attorney General of Pennsylvania were the two candidates, the Democrat and Republican. And they raised tens of millions of dollars. Our goal was not to win the race, but to raise those issues, to talk about the things that nobody was talking about. And what was great was that for the first few months of the campaign, I got into all of the debates, and almost all of the debates had the candidates speak in alphabetical order. So my name came just before M. Morrill, comes before Rendell.
Yeah.
And so I would say something, and Ed Rendell was forced every time to respond to it because the Democrats are used to being the progressive candidates. And Ed Rendell was more progressive than Mike Fisher, the Republican Attorney General, but he was not really a progressive. So it became a joke that he would say, after I would say something, he would say, I agree with Mike, but. And so we were talking about the death penalty. And one of the things that I'm proudest of in everything that I've done in my life was the last debate that I was allowed into. For my closing statement, instead of doing a closing statement, I found 3 exonerated death row inmates to come up and stand on stage behind me. So the 4 candidates were on the stage and were looking out into the audience, and then I said, instead of a closing statement, I'm going to have these exonerated death row inmates come up. And the look on Mike Fisher's face, the Republican Attorney General, and Ed Rendell, who was going to be sending people to the death row, they both looked really frightened. And these guys came and stood behind me, and we had T-shirts printed up with their faces on them.
Yeah.
And the former inmates gave the T-shirts to the other candidates and said to Mike Fisher and Ed Rendell, one of the 2 of you are going to be governor next year, which means you will be authorized to sign death warrants. Before you do that, I want you to remember the faces on these T-shirts, the faces behind me, because those are real people. And it's something that people still talk about in Pennsylvania. They don't remember anything about the other policies that I talk about or the minuscule amount of votes that I got in relationship to everybody else.
I have to find it, yeah.
But yeah, that's not on tape anywhere, unfortunately.
No.
It was in Harrisburg. It was at the Forum, which is part of the state capitol complex. I think it was sponsored by the NAACP, that debate. But that was one that was not televised.
That's probably the last time corporate media had that rule of one candidate going after the other, if they even invite the third candidate into the debate stage.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. And it wasn't long after that you started Keystone Progress. Justice for working families, for civil rights, for civil liberties, for everybody. That's equality. For progressive tax reform, for a healthy environment. 2008, today, still more pressing than ever. What, for starting an organization, what niche was this filling? What was going on?
So we started as a communications hub. I don't know if you're familiar with Granite State Progress, but
barely.
With Xandra Rice Hawken. She started a month before I did, starting the organization here in New Hampshire. So we were part of the Progress Now network. And the thought then was to use all of these new communication tools, email. I say that way because we worked closely with unions. Our initial money, about 3/4 of the money that we got to start the organization came from the union SEIU, Service Employees International Union. But all of the other unions that I reached out to, nobody within the organization had an email address. This is 2008.
It seems like.
None of them. I know. It's amazing how quickly things have changed. But the idea was to use these new tools. And I remember, so I was considered very progressive as far as the technology at that time. But while I was standing during my orientation, it was the week before the Democratic National Convention in Denver, Colorado. And so we stuck around for the convention, and I remember standing in line with some other progressive activists and some people who had similar operations in other states, and they were talking about this thing called Twitter. And they were tweeting while we were standing in line to go through security to get into Mile High Stadium to see Barack Obama accept the nomination. And they're saying, it was 140 characters then. And they're tweeting things like, it's an hour, we've been in line for an hour, we've only moved a little bit. And I said, how is this organizing? And I thought, this thing Twitter's not going to go anywhere. Well, of course, how wrong was I? But it became a really good organizing tool. But they were on the cutting edge of just sending out little messages like that, and then drawing people in, and then figuring out how to do that. So that's what we did at first. Doing all this kind of communication work, writing news releases. Then we decided that wasn't enough because that was a tool. it wasn't real organizing, old school organizing. So we expanded that and became the only organization in the country at the time to have a communication component like that, but also grassroots organizing. So we organized chapters outside of the two big cities in Pennsylvania, because there were lots of great progressive organizations in Philly and Pittsburgh. So we organized chapters in places like Scranton and Reading and Harrisburg and Erie, Lancaster, and smaller cities to do grassroots organizing and doing door-to-door work and that kind of thing. And we organized from that a statewide convention that was copied by, we love it that they copied us here in New Hampshire, but we called it the Pennsylvania Progressive Summit. And we ended up with 1,000 activists every year showing up. We got picked up by MSNBC some years. It was broadcast live most years. Most of the sessions on C-SPAN and the equivalent of C-SPAN in Pennsylvania. So it became a very, very powerful and potent organization, and worked on a number of issues, including LGBTQ rights.
Okay, then 2000,
which was very. I used to get, people couldn't figure out why we were doing that. So this, you're too young to remember the stigma of being gay. There still is some, but not like it used to be. And so the gay and lesbian organizations in Pennsylvania, we were an ally with them. We worked very closely with them, but all of their members would look and say, and they would whisper, they'd come and tell me later, people would tell me, they'd say, why are they doing that? They're not gay. Is Morrill gay? Like the only people who would be interested in that would be gay. So I wasn't, but one of the things that, again, that we were proud of was convincing U.S. Senator Bob Casey, who was a moderate Democrat, who was the U.S. Senator, but he was a devout Roman Catholic. And not a pretend one, like a lot of people pretend that they're religious. He really, really was. Mm-hmm. And he just couldn't, for almost everything else, he would be on our side. But for issues like lesbian and gay civil rights, he just couldn't get around the teachings that the church had at the time, that it was wrong. So we did a strong campaign of not doing all the kinds of stuff that we usually do. Emails, demonstrations, pickets, that sort of thing. But we also developed a personal campaign where we found people who would go to him and talk to him in his office. This was back when U.S. senators would actually listen to their constituents and have meetings with their constituents. And I remember being at one where we found this family where the son was gay, and that son, when he was young, was coached by Bob Casey in Little League. So the mother and a couple of other people and this son, who is now an adult, and I went to Bobby's office, and Bob Casey listened to it, and he loved this kid because he coached him. Mm-hmm. He knew him. He was a real person. And I can't remember the young man's name, but he talked about the discrimination that he faced, that he couldn't find an apartment with his partner, that he couldn't get a job, that he couldn't put the picture of his partner up anywhere in public. All of those kinds of stories really resonated with Bob, to the point where he ended up becoming a strong supporter of LGBTQ rights, to the point where, what I really loved was that he often gave us credit for it. He would say Keystone Progress was the organization that changed my mind.
That's incredibly powerful.
It is.
And just like I haven't been a part of a movement or seeing something change like that as a policy, but little victories like that make a world of a difference for those people that it impacts the most.
Yeah. The reason I do this work, it's hard work, as you know. It's frustrating. You meet with politicians or can't even meet with them, and they just don't change their mind despite all the evidence that they should. But the reason that I still do this, I'm not religious at all anymore. I used to be an ordained minister, but I'm not religious at all anymore. But I still believe in redemption. I believe that the work that we do can change people's minds, can change people's hearts. If I didn't believe that, then it wouldn't be worth doing it. I believe Donald Trump could change. I believe that Kelly Ayotte, under the right circumstances, could start understanding the trauma that her policies have imposed on trans kids. I just don't think she's had the opportunity to hear things. The only things she's hearing are from people who fund her, from her party. I really believe that people can change. Because if we didn't, then the majority of the people who voted in the elections last year gave us Donald Trump as president, gave us a majority in the House and in the Senate for the Republicans. So they have the majority. If we can't change people's minds, then why are we doing this work? They will remain the majority forever. It's up to us to have those individual conversations. It's up to us to have the collective conversations, to do things like posting things on Facebook, having demonstrations outside offices. Even though I don't think we changed anybody's minds in that meeting with the legislative staff that I talked about earlier a couple of hours ago. I think that that person, even though he was a representative of the elected official, you could tell looking in his eyes that he was touched by the testimony of the people who are doing the work. It was really powerful watching all of those people. There were 26, 27 people from around New Hampshire talking and giving their testimony about why this I don't know why I'm not saying her name, Senator Hassan, needs to change her mind. She needs to change her mind on this stuff. She says some nice words every once in a while, but she still supports sending weapons, sending bombs. She still has said nothing about forcing Israel to allow medicine and food and other necessities into Gaza. But the reason that we had this meeting, the reason that we continue to do this work, those of us who are doing it, is because I believe in redemption. We believe that people can change. And I've got evidence of that. And that story about Bob Casey is just a clear case of that happening.
To make it easier for them, whether I call them empire managers, I take that from Caitlin Johnstone, to make it easier for them to stick with the program, for the only people that have their ear are their donors and other officials, and it's roughly running the same program, and the mixture of influences, because there's a set agenda, and so not even being available, you have to talk to an aide. That's another person removed, so you can't even get their ear anymore, because they might be persuaded that to have a more humane touch to with their policies, that it actually affects people in a negative way. I never thought about that. I didn't grow up in an era where it seemed like they were held responsible, or at least had to witness. I remember there's a story, I don't remember the man who did it, but I think it was against Robert McNamara, had to see it in the Vietnam War. The guy he set himself on fire, and I think Robert McNamara saw it, and it changed him, not for the better, but for maybe that he actually later in life said that it was a mistake to support this, the duty he did for the Vietnam War. And you'd also, going on to another organization, had some impressive numbers, Grey Roots.
Yeah, a couple of the organizations that I've been involved with have merged into other organizations, which is also unique. When I talked about Pennsylvania's Campaign for Choice, it was a pro-choice political action committee. Let me just do an aside on that. This was in the early 1990s, and our board of directors bylaws said that the board had to be made up of 50% Republicans, 50% Democrats, and we were 100% pro-choice. We were pretty radical on abortion. And this, in the early 90s, you could get a board of directors with legislators and Republican funders who would be part of a pro-choice political action committee. There's a state senator who was part of our board, who changed his mind afterwards and became anti-choice, but he was on our board of directors. We did that in the early 90s, yeah, and then moved into, and so anyway, that organization there were 2 other pro-choice political action committees in Pennsylvania, and instead of all of us competing, we ended up merging the organizations to become one, more powerful. Too often organizations have this institutional ego where they just want to be themselves and keep things going, and it didn't make any sense, so we merged them and became a more powerful organization. The same thing happened with after I left. Keystone Progress merged with another organization, and Grey Roots Action also merged with another organization. But the idea for Grey Roots Action was that there was no organization that was progressive, truly progressive, that was working on issues for older Americans.
Yeah.
We called them American elders. We called them senior citizens. We called them American elders, which comes out of a lot of traditions. Most of the rest of the world respects their elders.
Yeah,
and we just kind of shuffle them aside and
right.
Don't even take care of them in our homes anymore. We put them in nursing homes. So the idea was to create an organization that works on issues, progressive issues, and not just Social Security and things that you consider as senior issues, but issues that we care about as older Americans, but from a senior citizen, American elder perspective. So that's what the organization was, and it grew phenomenally, almost overnight. But again, there was another organization that was starting at the same time that had backing of the unions, and so rather than trying to keep that organization going and competing with the Alliance, I can't remember the name of the organization now, Alliance for Retired Americans? Yeah. Anyway, we decided that it made more sense to throw our support to them. Yeah. But we worked on a lot of issues. We created some good momentum, got hundreds of thousands of people to join in just a short amount of time.
There was an impressive number that I saw. I forget where the article was.
Yeah, it was around 500,000.
Yeah, yeah. That's, and to think starting organizations fighting for a meaningful change in policies at the local or state or federal level. And I mean, it's the grassroots, it's the building communities, it's what we are seeing less and less, a decrease in, let's say, more confinement or solitary. There's a lot of individualism and people looking out for themselves, and there's not that sense of outreach, the community aspect. I was just, as I was going through, I was like, wow, this is really impressive. There's a lot of people fighting in their own way with their interest in especially in these progressive aspects, that want meaningful change, and they're frustrated by the system.
Yeah.
If I were to, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that one of the things that we wanted to do with that and didn't because we closed down, merged with the other organization, but the idea of having a big organization and just doing it online with emails and Facebook and that sort of thing is great, but that's really a tool and it's not real organizing. So what we were starting to do, and the other organization did do, and is continuing to do, is organize local chapters. That's what really works. So it's great to have that means of communication for the information, to send out a blast email to 500,000 people and have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people respond nationwide. But the real way that you get true change is by the old shoe leather, wearing out grassroots organizing, knocking on doors, having meetings in your community, talking to folks in your church and synagogue and mosque. Those are the kinds of things that really make a difference. So that's the kind of work that continues to need to be done, and the kind of work that we're starting to do now here in New Hampshire as well. With Peace Action, they've been doing amazing work statewide. But we just, you were there just last month. We had our first chapter meeting of a chapter for the organization. And the reason for that is not that Peace Action isn't doing great work at the national level or at the state level. They are. They're doing phenomenal work. But the way that you get real change is by people meeting with each other. With Keystone Progress, when we did our local chapter meetings, for instance, we didn't just have a meeting on a Friday night where people would come and you'd have 20, 30, 40 people come and we talk about issues. We looked at the kinds of people that we wanted to come. Who are the people that we're knocking on doors with who don't show up at meetings? We had lots of single mothers who loved the work that we were doing. They'd sign petitions, they'd get our emails, but they never came out to things. So instead of just saying, oh well, we talked to them and said, why don't you come to the meeting? They said, you kidding? I've got 3 kids under the age of 10. How am I going to come to a meeting? Yeah. So we changed the way that we had our meetings. We had them at different times of day. We experimented to find out which times of day, but we also didn't provide childcare because that created too many legal issues for us. But we did a rotating thing where if we had an organization in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is where this worked really well, we'd have 20, 25 women show up and we'd have them take turns. So if you had 25 kids there, then 2 of the mothers would take the turn and they wouldn't be at the meeting this time. They'd just watch the kids, help them play. And that allowed the mothers to come and be part of the organization. And we did the same thing. Instead of just having it be a meeting, what about if 3 or 4 or 5 of the people who were there brought food? Kind of like the old pitch-in dinners, the potluck dinners that churches and synagogues would have. So we did that kind of thing too. So people would there would be food and you didn't have to cook that night and somebody's watching your kids. So it became not just a meeting that they wanted to come to, it became something where it was also a little bit of relief from the tedium of having kids. Shouldn't use the word tedium. I'm a father of 4 kids. I love my children, but the truth is that they are also tiresome at times and you need a break.
Yeah, what you're describing is meeting people where they're at, and organizing, bringing them into the fold.
And our opponents are good at that. They do that kind of thing. They find ways to make sure that women with kids can come to meetings, that families can come to meetings, and we have a lot to learn from them. Not from their policies, but from the kinds of ways that they've been doing organizing. The truth is that the right has been out organizing the left very, very well over the last couple of decades.
Okay. Given the amount of time we have left, there is a particular topic I want to get to.
Okay.
And I want to talk about Palestine, Gaza, West Bank. I'm going to start with this quote. I had a section on civic responsibility, but I'll start this with, there exists a solidarity among men as human beings that make each co-responsible for every wrong and injustice in the world, especially for crimes committed in his presence or with his knowledge. If I fail to do whatever I can to prevent them, I too am guilty. And this is Carl Jasper's 1945. Obviously end of World War II. And I wanted to talk about Gaza and FASNA, or I don't know if they actually pronounce the organization that way, but Friends of Sabeel North America, I forget who the writer of the article was, put out an article and had this quote, "Let us offer then, as a working principle, the following. No statement, theological or otherwise, should be made that would not be credible in the presence of burning children." This is Rabbi Irving Greenberg. I don't know if you saw that article.
No.
I think it just came out. And I read your Substack. And what's going on, this is what got me to actually become active, to go from disillusioned to I can't be passive, I have to act. And it was after a year of this already happening pretty much. And when you talk about the frustration, you put your efforts into stopping something, but I don't have the background and it doesn't seem like I can do much. I do what I can, but where do we go from here? It's an ongoing genocide. The U.S. has the power to cut this off, to stop this. We see the images, we see the videos. It's been nonstop, and yet it continues. And we have representatives and senators we can't reach, that have staff that are sympathetic to us, that are the middlemen in this. What would you like to say?
you know that just before I started my job in March, like literally 2 days before, I just came back from the West Bank.
Yes.
And the West Bank was horrific, but it was nothing compared to what's going on in Gaza. So I know not everybody can do what I did, to go. I don't have the same kind of family responsibilities that other folks have. So not everybody can go and see there and come back and be a witness to what's happening. But all of us can do something. I was dismissing as not enough doing things like sending emails or writing letters. I didn't mean it to sound that way. What I meant to say was that the best way of organizing is by doing things face to face. But every little thing that we do. Amy Antonucci, who's the chair of the New Hampshire Peace Action Education Fund, likes to say, and it's true, that if a legislator, a federal legislator, member of the House of Representatives or a U.S. senator, if they get as few as 6 phone calls, the next morning they will have that as a discussion. Now, they may not change their mind, but they will at least bring it up in the staff meeting the next day. So think about that. If only 6 of us call tomorrow to our 2 United States senators, Shaheen and Hassan, and say, do everything in your power to make sure that food and medicine and other things get into Gaza and stop the bombs going to Israel. That doesn't mean they're going to change their mind tomorrow, but it means that they will at least be talking about it. So that's something that we can do. And the more that we do those kinds of things, the more likely it is that they will change their mind. Gave that story about Bob Casey on purpose for just that reason, to show that it can happen. It doesn't happen all the time, because there are so many forces arrayed against us. But the message that I want to give to the viewers is anything you can do. If you can afford to give money, give money. If you can afford, if you have the time to actually go to demonstrations, go to demonstrations. If you can only send an email in response to an email that you get about what's going on in Gaza, do that. Everybody can do something. Not everybody can do everything, but every little bit helps. So collectively, that's what happens. There's an old folk song, and I'm not going to try to remember the exact lyrics because I'll butcher them. But the song is about, if you think about a water wheel, an old-fashioned water wheel at a mill, one drop isn't going to turn that wheel, but drop, drop, drop. Collectively, it becomes a rivulet, and that will turn the wheel and do things like grind grain to turn it into flour. All of that is because of everybody collectively doing it. So we may just be one drop, but collectively we can become a river and make a difference.
Yeah. I had listed under a section of what we can do, your recent Substack article. You had a list of things. Please interrupt me if you want to say something about either of these. But build political pressure in your home countries. That's international. It seems like the pressure has been mounting. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem like it comes fast enough, but it is. It seems like it's coming. Target the banks, the insurers, the pension funds, underwriting settlement expansion. This article was specifically on the West Bank with the background of Gaza. Because the settlement expansion, this is, if I'm butchering his name, Bezalel Smotrich, just came out with another settlement expansion policy, demolishing. I watched that video you gave about your return from the West Bank.
Yep. I'm reaching into my pocket for visual aid.
Yeah. Elevate renderings of human stories, the grief of families losing land and access to water. How atrocious! I think it was Tallahassee Coates wrote about his return, and he was on a major news network. If you know the author,
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Ta-Nehisi Coates. But he talked about how is this not like the South? I'm paraphrasing what I heard him. How is this not like?
Yeah.
How is this not apartheid? How is this not? How can these people? How can you think this is normal? This is, and why is this? Why is there so much coverage given and leeway given to the Israelis for this conduct?
Yep.
And it brings up all kinds of questions, and it's been really important in the coalition meetings to separate, because there is those on the right that want to say it's Jews, but we're making the distinction here. This is not Judaism that we're against here. This is a support of a settler state. This is support of an apartheid system, and we want to dismantle that. That doesn't have anything to do with the religious beliefs.
Exactly. So this is what I was trying to pull out of my pocket.
Yeah.
I carry this around with me all the time. So part of what I was doing in the West Bank in February and March was we were doing two things. One was accompaniment. So that what that means is that we were actually helping people get through checkpoints, and like we were helping kids try to get to their school, because there was a checkpoint between where they lived and where their school was, and the checkpoint was closed all the time we were there, so they couldn't get there. But that was one aspect. The other aspect of what we were doing was to be a witness of what was happening. So we would go to places where some of these atrocities were occurring, and the day before we were supposed to go to this community in the West Bank outside of Hebron, the Israeli occupation forces came in and knocked down, demolished a home, because the settlers wanted that land. And this is part of the floor of that home. So we went there the next day, talked to the family, talked to people in the village, and they did absolutely nothing wrong. They've been there for generations. But because of the weirdness of Israeli law in the West Bank and the occupied territories, it's a combination of British Mandate law, the old Ottoman Empire law, and Israeli law. And so you have to prove your ownership through generations, not just through generations, but you have to trace your ownership back all the way to the British Mandate and beyond into the Ottoman Empire in order to prove that that's your land. And if you can't prove that, then the forces can come in and for no reason just come in and knock it down and give it to somebody else.
And somebody from the East Coast can come and move in and build a new home.
Yep.
Right there. Yeah.
So I carry this around. It's in my pocket. I feel it all the time. It's kind of like a worry stone, but it reminds me of the reality of that situation. And we talked to those families the very next day.
Yeah. Talking about bearing witness, people can do that at home when they that you don't have to watch the thousands of hours of video and see the images, but it's there. It's undeniable. And I go back to that quote from the rabbi. I don't know where it is now, but does your view of morality, does your view of a righteous world or with justice, does it fit in the face of starving children, of burning children, of people buried under the rubble? Does it still align that this is okay, this sits well? More likely than not, you'd see that and know this is a government that, through elected and unelected officials, is enforcing this policy. This doesn't represent majority of our views. Nobody looks at most people. 98% of people look at that and think this is beyond cruelty, and yet it still goes on.
Right.
And so we're faced with a lot of people. Are faced with when you have faith in elected leaders who are not changing their position on this. Why? How can you do that? Yeah. And that's something a lot of us are grasping. Just how? What do you mean you can't? What are you doing still with upholding these policies in the face of all the evidence against it?
Right. Yeah. I'm hesitant to equate anything to anything related to the Nazis, but the reality is that if you talk to anybody today, 99.9%, well, maybe not anymore, but most people, if you ask them, what would you have done if you were around in the 1930s in Germany? Almost everybody says, oh, I would have opposed the Nazis. Well, the truth is that this is the moral issue of our day. What's happening is the same kind of thing. Ethnic cleansing, genocide, the atrocities that we see every single day about the traps that are being set up where you have aid distribution and people come to pick up the food in Gaza, and then they're shot or bombed. You can't say that you would be opposed to the Nazis in the 1930s and what was going on with their genocide and ethnic cleansing, and ignore what's happening today.
Yeah. And Munther Isaac, the pastor at the Bethlehem Christmas Church in the West Bank, his thing was, where were you during the genocide? What did you do?
Yep.
How will you tell your children? I may have added that last part in, but what will you say when this was happening?
Yep.
What did you do?
We visited his church. He wasn't there when I was there in February.
Okay. And in light of we don't have enough time to speak about the injustice that's being enacted here in the United States, domestically, against the marginalized groups in this country. But we have what's going on foreign, our U.S. foreign policy it is U.S. foreign policy that's enabling this in face of the entire world that is opposed to this. It seems the entire world is opposed to this, and the U.S. is supporting this. Veto power at the UN, denying the resolutions in the Security Council, time and time again, the lies that are coming out. But it starts with each and every one of us reaching out to neighbors, friends, community, what's going on, to not be apathetic, to be a moral agent. Don't give away your agency to your leaders. They represent you, but they also don't represent you. Hold them accountable. Our only shot at anything is holding them accountable. They're acting because they're acting this way for whatever the reason they're acting this way, whether it's power or prestige or monetary. The only way we can hold them accountable in our system is to vote them out. But that means we organize, we persuade our fellow community members that there's a better alternative and they're not being held accountable and they can get away with this.
Right. A dear friend of mine, and of yours, Karishma Manzoor, is announcing for U.S. Senate tomorrow. And I talked to her the other day and I said, when you're elected, when you do wrong, we're going to come after you too.
Yes.
And that's the way it has to be.
Always.
When I was 18, I did community organizing training with the Midwest Academy. And one of the first rules they taught us were that in this kind of work, there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. That we try to persuade people, whether they're in elected office or not, that we try to work with them. And one of the problems that we have had, I think, politically in the United States is that we have just become tribal. So that when I was working with Keystone Progress, somebody asked me once, what happens if the Republicans take all your positions? And they were expecting me to say some answer, I don't know what, but my answer was, then we won. If you're trying to persuade people, I don't care who gets credit for it, if Donald Trump is actually able to end the Ukrainian war with justice, that's a key component. But if that happens, I will celebrate that. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, but that doesn't mean that he can't be right. And when he is right, we should celebrate that. That's the kind of work that needs to happen. We need to focus on the issues and not personalities or tribal labels that we might have.
Okay. Even if they take our positions, that's we wanted so long as we actually wanted those policies, and we want the policy, regardless of who implements it.
Yep.
I think that's all the time we have. Thank you for tuning in. Reach out to your local peace organizations. Lefty, thank you for coming on.
Thank you. New Hampshire Peace Action. .org.
Thank you.